Jennifer Scheidt. I'm the editor of Farm Journal's Pork, and along with Angie Denton, who is unable to be here today and is being replaced by the lovely Emily Grund, we are going to be basically kicking off a great session. And before we get started with our two awesome writers to share some wonderful tips with us today, I wanted to just remind you guys that this is something that we would like to be a conversation, so please don't hesitate to use the chat. I know that they'll be encouraging you throughout as well, but we really want this to be helpful to you. I know we all come into this from different vantage points, and so let's just make this time be something that is fruitful for all. And I'm sure if you have questions, somebody else does too, so don't hesitate to ask. Before we get started too, I wanted to open the door for Stacy, our executive director, to share any news or information that she would like. I know it's a super busy time for LPC right now, and so I thought maybe you could just give us a quick highlight or update.
Yeah, thank you so much. So award contest is a huge thing that we're working on right now. We did just extend the early entry deadline to Monday, April 24th. So if you maybe needed a little more time, we would love for you to get those contest entries in, or if you have any questions about that, please let me know. We are in our membership renewal period right now. I know there's been some confusion about membership timeframes in the past, so we're trying to shore that up a little bit, but most membership dues come in around the same time as award contests. So that is why the membership renewal period is around the same time as that. So be looking for renewal information, and we are going to also start, pushing some membership. And so if you know of anyone who would be a great addition to LPC, please feel free to send them the information. And if you need that, I'm happy to send it over to you. Would love to arm you to help us promote LPC and get some more folks in. It's a great organization. And so just give everybody the chance to take advantage of that. Sheila is neck deep in AMS registration and all of that. AMS registration is open. So if you can visit agmediasummit.com and get all the details. It looks like a great program that's coming together, and Palm Springs is beautiful. And so we hope that you'll be able to join us in Palm Springs at the end of July, beginning of August. That registration goes up in July, registration fees, but there's no reason to wait. So you could go ahead and get registered for that now. We are just trying to figure out ways to add value to LPC. So if you ever have any ideas or thoughts or want to serve on one of our committees, just reach out. We would love to have you involved and love new ideas of ways that we can provide value to you and to all of our members. So just anytime you have feedback, let me know. And I appreciate the time. And if anybody has any questions, happy to help, and really excited about the topic today.
Thanks a lot, Stacy. And I thank you we have a newsletter that just came out. I believe it came out this morning. I think that was the right timing.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and it's got tons of great information in it. And also one of the things that we're doing too is we're going to be putting together some stories after these to kind of share those tips in different ways, just because not everybody can join us for this, and we hope they'll go listen later. But this may be also a way to just help us all remember some of the great information that's shared. So I just want to thank our education committee members who are part of this and help make these stories possible. And I need to do a shameless plug for the Gifts and Giving auction. We were talking about that a little bit before, but we are going to have the Gifts and Giving auction. It's going to kick off during Ag Media Summit, and we would love to get really cool items donated. So if you've got any thoughts or ideas, if you would like to make a donation, or if your company would, it's just one way that we can help support LPC programs and activities. So we gladly welcome any of those by June 1st, if possible. So if you could just shoot me a message, I'll put my email in the chat here in a little bit. But with that, we'll get on to the reason why you guys are here. We are going to be talking about ways to keep some of the topics that you write about 300 times a year fresh. And I feel like that's something as a writer, I always kind of struggle with, how do I keep making this interesting and engaging? How do I draw people in? I have learned that just because I've written about it 300 times, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else has read about it 300 times. So that kind of motivates me to keep trying to find ways to be creative and to not give up on some of those topics that are definitely of service to our readers. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers. We have Kasey Brown, who's a Filament Content Marketing Specialist, and Lindsay Sankey, a farm wife, mother, and writer. Lindsay is also a mother and writer as well. So, and wife, I don't know about farm wife, but you guys kind of have acquired quite a bit of land. So maybe you qualify.
We'll get there.
Your wife.
Right.
I'll be quiet. I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat, everybody.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Lindsay.
So I'll introduce myself really briefly. I am on a marketing team for Co-Alliance Cooperative, which is a large ag retailer here in the Midwest, actually the largest farmer-owned ag retailer in the U.S. So that's my job by trade. I also have a personal blog and I work daily on the farm. So that's kind of the part of my presentation will be twofold. I do a lot of creative writing. I also am forced to do technical writing throughout my career. So Kasey.
All right, and I am Kasey Brown. We are both Indiana girls. I'm native, but she actually lives there. And I worked for 11 years. I spent the last 11 years working as an editor for Angus Media. And for the almost last 5 months, I have been a content marketing specialist with Filament. And I see a lot of Filament folks here. Hi, Philip. So I come at this with a lot of different writing experience. So we're gonna share some of our ideas. We're gonna have a lot of fun today. One thing we want to say this up front, Filament's really big about aligning, making sure everybody's on the same page. Nothing we say today is gonna be revolutionary. Nothing we say today is going to be a silver bullet. We both have learned from a lot of the people on this webinar. So all that to say is what we are hoping for is to, one, either make you think about something in a little bit different way, or to honestly just remind you of things that might be a different way to think about things. We know we don't have all of the good ideas. So if you think of an idea, one, we want you to put it in the chat, or we want you to unmute your microphone. I know, crazy during a webinar, right? And share something, because we're all here to learn. You all tuned in, you're obviously very brilliant, and we want to share our ideas. We want to learn from you guys, and we want to have a lot of fun today. So we've got a short amount of time, so we will dig in. Let's see. Okay, so again, this is pretty basic, but we need to start with why when we're writing. I've read a book called Building a Story Brand. If there are any Angus folks on here, you've probably read this. It's basically a marketing book, but also very good for journalists as well. And it talks about how basically every story is focused on keeping your reader as the hero, and there are these archetypes throughout it. And so in this hero's journey, that there is a sage or the guide, which often is where we come in as writers. They have a problem, they need help. Either our publication or our clients can provide that help. And so then we write focusing on that to get him all the way around the journey, the circle. But we want to make sure that the reader is at the center of what we're writing about.
I'll add to that. So a book I would highly recommend, if you haven't read it yet, is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. This is all about getting to the heart of why we're doing certain things. So the premise here is anyone in this world can tell you what they do on a day-to-day basis, from the time their feet hit the ground to the time they begin rest at night. We can go through our day with you. Anyone can do that. We can also easily talk about how we do those things. Maybe how our writing sets us apart, or how our parenting is different from someone else. But sometimes it's really hard to talk about your why and the foundation of why you do the things you do and why you value the things you do. If you figure that out, and by the way, your why can change as your life evolves, everything is much easier. So I've created this circle, and this is a Simon Sinek circle, but I've got one in the office, the corporate office, and it changes, but my what, my how has changed a lot, but never my why. And sometimes when I'm struggling with a deadline or getting something done creatively, I always have to go back to that and reconnect there. So that's a highly recommended book, but also that's really good we all know our why. We can talk about our how, but if you know your why, that's much more effective.
Absolutely. And we'll put both of these books in the chat. So any resources we talk about, we'll make sure you have access to that. So another thing, no matter whether you're writing about calving season for the 800th time, or PRRS resistance in pigs, or all sorts of things that, I mean, agriculture is pretty cyclical. So there's a very good chance we're going to write about the same things many, many times. So one thing to help keep it interesting is to connect to some of your other interests. Granted, I know I'm a little bit out of the ordinary in that my large other interest is musical theater. So not always going to be able to connect to our readers by pulling in musical theater, but you know what? I have used some lyrics in an article before. And I know I have written best foot forward at some point. And you know what? I said that in a British accent in my head, and it made me giggle, and then it made me happier about writing. So anything that can get you in a good creative space is great. Gil Gullickson from DTN Progressive Farm. No, he's Successful Farming. I'm just retired, but he used a lot of really great sports analogies because a lot of our readers really love reading sports, and that helps connect things, especially when you're talking about technical issues, anything to make it relatable, because everybody, even though we're all tied to, we love our families, we love animals, that's why we're part of this organization or our companies, we have other interests, and that's allowed, and that helps us connect on other ways and helps bring some new ideas into some of those repeatable topics. One other thing though I like to do is like build a bank of information about either your readers, other people in the industry, kind of keep some of those things in the back of your mind of how did we connect? What are they interested in? And how can you bring in some of those examples to make you connect other things? Like a couple weeks ago, I used 2 Ozzy Osbourne references in a marketing email, and again, made me smile, and I loved it. Eventually we edited that out because it didn't fit the client's tone, but it did get the creative juices flowing, and it helped create some better copy eventually. So yes, it doesn't have to be, it can serve as just a starting point, even if it doesn't stay in forever.
I wrote a piece about what do I call it? Oh, a souvenir. And this was on our personal blog. So the highlights our farm, a souvenir my husband brought home from actually an Angus show at Junior Nationals from Kansas. And I wrote about this flint rock, this monument that looks like a headstone that now stands in our front yard that says National Junior Angus Association on it, which is crazy to me. And it kind of makes my head spin thinking that it's in the front yard. But I wrote about it, and this blog got published online, of course, but then our local newspaper picked it up. And I actually received one email and one letter from people telling me like how I was calling the rock the wrong thing, like the wrong material out of Kansas. One gentleman was from Kansas and read it, and one gentleman was stationed in Kansas, in Ogden, Kansas at Fort Riley for some time. And I thought it was so interesting that something as stupid as this rock that Cody brought home from Kansas City connected me with these 2 men in different ways. Number one, I learned a lot about the soil type in the Flint Hills. And then I also learned, or lack thereof, if you really understand that, and then I learned about how these stones were made. And so just throwing that nugget of just humor of what's going on our farm made that connection for us. And now I'm confident if I ever had a question, or if I ever wanted to explore something else that way, I have 2 new resources to do so.
And yeah, you're not always going to be able to use those connections all the time. You may be able to use something you learned about one of your readers or someone else a couple of years down the road, but you knew that they were interested in that, so that helps connect the dots sometimes. Okay, so now it's your turn. One thing, Lindsay, or two things Lindsay and I had talked about. We both like to ask these questions in either our interviews, in podcast interviews, some things, just ways to get to know other people as people instead of just as a tech expert or as a producer. So go ahead, Lindsay, you ask your question. We do want any of you, we're going to call on anybody, but if anybody, we want you to answer these in the chat. And if you're willing to share that, you can unmute your mic.
So with my job at Co-Alliance Cooperative, I do host Cultivated, a podcast delivered by Co-Alliance. And at the end of every interview, whether that be with the Indiana State Department of Ag or the Indiana State FFA officer teams, I ask 5 fast questions, and they're dumb. You can't go anywhere with them, but I ask them quickly so that I get an honest answer. But one of my favorite ones to ask is, imagine you had a Saturday with nothing on the calendar or your to-do list. How do you spend your day? And that is so telling. When people, you learn a lot about people when you see how they value and use their time. And so that's a wonderful question that has opened a lot of floodgates. I usually cut the podcast off right there. I mean, that's 5 fun, fast questions, but then we might sit for 30 minutes and talk about the answer to this question. And it's a great way to learn about people and open a whole new side of conversation that doesn't have anything to do with Angus cattle or raising children or fertilizer season, you know? So that's probably my favorite question to ask. But yeah, we would love for you guys to answer this in the chat box if you would.
Absolutely. Or one of my questions is always, what do you like to do for fun? I ask this in almost any intern interview. I ask people who are interviewing me. I ask everyone because I just like to know about people. And it's something pretty easy to answer, or at least easy to ask. Maybe not easy to answer sometimes. So Emily Grund has volunteered for us earlier to answer that. Would you mind unmuting your mic and share with us something you like to do for fun or something you would do on a Saturday that's unplanned?
Yes, I'd say what I like to do for fun is attending Hereford shows with my family or being in the barn on a Saturday. But if I absolutely have nothing to do, I'd say going to the lake.
Love it. Being outdoors, being around water. That's something that a lot of us probably have in common. I love that. But now I feel like I know you a little bit more. And that's something that if you just keep in the back of your mind helps you bring new perspectives to something you have to write about. Or one thing I should have said earlier on the why, I've learned, especially with technical writing, you have to write about genetics or you have to write about nutrition management. And that's, I mean, that can get nitty gritty and less fun. I like to ask some of those tech experts why they got interested in this. And so then you get a little bit of a personal experience, or you can humanize some of that technical stuff. And it doesn't always work in every article that's pretty technical, but if you can get a little bit of the why into it, of why are they interested in this? Why did they spend so many years of their life studying this? That kind of helps with that too, and has a little bit more perspective.
And
all right, so thank you for your answer, Emily. Yes, go ahead.
To physically change your view. So I was telling Kasey that sometimes when I am in a funk, I physically get on the level of our children, which is age 6 and 4, and look at the world at the height or size that they are. You know, I get down on the floor, and it's amazing how that change of perspective can bring new insights to mind. Sometimes it's just stepping out of your space and getting away from this corner of our home where I do so much writing, and getting where they are at a different level and getting outside to really spark some ideas and some interesting perspectives.
Excellent. And so kind of a shameless plug for LPC. We just started a Facebook group called the LPC Learning Lounge that's attached to the LPC Facebook page. If you use that QR code, it will take you directly to the page. We've also asked you that question on that page. And just a fun way to get to know each other, find out some of our commonalities. And we would love for you to join us there. So shameless plug done. but use that QR code. I'll put it somewhere else too. But we would love for you to join us there. Okay, shameless plug done. Okay, so Lindsay is one of the funniest writers I know, which is why I wanted her to join me on this webinar. So I will let her talk about this.
So humor wins readers. It's very easy. It's not always easy to do, but you will always have someone coming back to find your article in a specific publication somewhere on the web if you include humor into that. This day and age, everything we've experienced the last 3 to 5 years, humor is like really good for the health, right? For your health, for our mental well-being. So a lot of the writing I do, even when I'm writing for the cooperative business, I try to include some kind of humor in it and with our brand at Co-Alliance. A couple of years ago, I made a lamb cake and it was terrifying. And this is the line that more people have quoted or laughed at. And when I took this lamb cake out of the oven and we tried to build it and put it together, I told Cody, I said, get the kids outside. This is going to get ugly. And he just looked at me and he said, can it get uglier than that? And I'm like, get the kids outside. So this, that's just a funny personal example from our blog and then the local newspaper column that was popular. Also, people like to see you fail, right? So I can't tell you how many times I looked on Pinterest at all these beautiful pictures of this Easter lamb cake, and I was pretty confident that's how mine would turn out. But there's humor and humility, and that is always that's always well done when you're writing to a vast audience, no matter how personal or not it is.
Mm-hmm. And then some of that is the style of like sentence structure. It's punchier, it's shorter, and sometimes it's good to get into the headspace of I want this short and punchy, because I know I get pretty wordy sometimes, and sometimes shifting that can help you get more clarity. Even if you're not trying to be funny, because I don't know if I'm that funny, but just getting out of your comfort zone a little bit and trying to different sentence structures like that helps quite a bit.
It helps talking to a peer. Is this even funny? Like, does that make sense to everyone? Does that humor resonate with most readers? Don't be afraid to check that with someone else before going live with something.
I love it. Right. One thing, so I host the Angus at Work podcast still, and we always add at the end of the podcast that the cattle business is really the people business, but really, and then we ask like, tell me something good. But I mean, all of agriculture is really a people business. Even if you got into agriculture or livestock production because you don't want to deal with people, because I mean, that was probably my dad. But we still inherently like to know about other people. We like to know our connections. We like to know how people are doing this business as a people business. So we're kind of a herd people, herd species. That's what I meant. But so keeping that authenticity in your writing of like, even if it's technical, knowing about some failures because we're all human and that happens. How did you get through that? What kind of technical changes did you decide upon? Keeping some of that authenticity and human nature in even a technical piece helps quite a bit.
Some of the most valuable feedback in writing is hearing, I thought I was the only one. You know, whether it's a water is frozen or busted that day, or an underground pipe, or you know, having a rough calving season with a tough winter or something. Humans like to read about humans, and I say misery loves company. You know, no one likes someone else to be miserable, but there is comfort in knowing that you don't have to go at it alone because someone else is experiencing what you are. And so absolutely don't be afraid to use that authenticity and across writing, and because you don't know who you're going to connect with, whether they reach out and tell you that or not.
Absolutely. All right. We kind of touched on this, but switching up your perspective, a lot of publications, of agencies, of any type of writing, it feels like now you're going to leverage some of that content into different platforms or formats. And so even if you're stuck on one bit of the story in your long form, shift your mindset and think about it in terms of a programmatic ad where you only have 125 characters. Like, that's going to get you straight to the point. And it helps focus. And then sometimes once you focus that idea, it helps spark some things as you build out your article or your email or your social post. I mean, there are tons of ways to write about this kind of content. So if you're stuck on one of them, just shift your platform. And I think that helps get to the meat sooner. But always keep in mind what's in it for me, but what's in it for the reader, not just me. Though sometimes you do have to keep it in mind for you because you have to write it. Yeah, that's a pretty easy one. Okay, so I've heard many times at Ag Media Summit, talking to lots of other writers, great writers read. And it honestly, I don't think it really matters what you're reading. It doesn't have to be great works of fiction. It can be rom-com novels, like what I'm reading right now. I got some really cool vocabulary words out of it. It was great. There's a reason why you picked that book up. Steal something from it, whether that's style or storytelling or anything.
So one really random person I follow, she's been dead for 100 years, is Julia Strauss. And it's something, this is the power of social media, right? So like a year ago, Indiana Historical Society posted about this Julia Strauss, who was a writer from the west side of Indiana, and she grew up on a farm. She was a farm wife and a mother, but she started writing for the local newspaper. Her husband was the editor, and she started writing for the local newspaper under a false name. And she gained such great readership through her stories off the farm that she went on to be one of the longest, I don't know if you call it contracted, but syndicated, writers for Good Housekeeping magazine in the 1800s. Wrote for them for several years. And that is how she delivered her stories off the farm to people all over the United States. Well, of course, I'm like, I want to be her. Like, I want to be this woman. And so actually for my birthday, my husband found her book. And so I have been reading all these submissions that she wrote for Good Housekeeping back in like 1885. And it's remarkable. Number one, some of the things that she did as a woman on the farm, I'll never feel sorry for myself ever again. But number one, but also it's brought a whole new perspective of the evolution of language. And so some of it's hard to read, the way that her writing style or how lazy I've gotten as in my speech or in my writing. So some of hers is difficult to read and translate for the today's mind. But it has really stretched my brain and my creative thinking in how can I tell my story differently that it might reach a different audience. Certainly I'll never be syndicated for Good Housekeeping magazine, but I think it's an inspiration of how she was a very good storyteller, a very opinionated woman, but she could be that way because she was writing under a false name. So it's kind of neat how her life unfolded when people figured out who she was. But that has brought in the last year really good perspective to my own life. So I wanted to put that up there so we didn't forget.
Perfect. I've read this quote several times, but creativity is glorified thievery. Sometimes it's like how you can read a recipe and then change a little bit and then it's your recipe. Writing is kind of it's very much like that. I'm not condoning like plagiarism. That's not what I'm saying, but you can get ideas from reading other writing and then tweak it, put your own spin on it or your own style in it. And then it's become something new. And I think that is really cool. It opens up a lot of opportunities and a lot of options. I love the possibilities with that. So if you're stuck on writing another article on the things you need in a calving checklist, go read other publications that write about it, see how they're doing it. again, don't steal what they're doing, but get an idea of what other people are writing about it. And granted, I know this group of people is insanely busy and we don't have a lot of time to write or to read, but it's definitely worth it. I think it's definitely a good thing. And again, like other styles of writing, there's a reason it's popular. So what can we learn from reading other styles of writing that we can incorporate into our own, which I think is really helpful. All right. So this is kind of the tough love slide we put together. So especially when I started at Angus Media, deadlines were rolling. We had a lot of content to get out. And I remember one day I was just not feeling writing. And so I was like looking up inspiration to get past writer's block. And this article came up. I cannot find it online anymore, but I took out some of the best. It's very much a tough love of not all writing is going to be precious. Sometimes you just have to get it done because that's what deadlines require, because it is about the reader and it's not about you. So I think she's like the real tough love part of it. She said, there is no such thing as writer's block, just lazy writing. I was like, oh, okay, let's get to work. But even when it doesn't feel like it's flowing, when it feels like you're pulling teeth, you still have to get it done and you still have to get the information out. The good thing is, the quote I have here, that even when she has found when she least feels like writing, that's kind of when her best work comes out, because she has had the discipline to keep going. So push through it, fight your own debilitating inertia, and just do it. And I had that posted at my desk for a long time. And it's been very helpful, honestly. I mean, everybody loves it when the muse comes and the words flow out of you like water. And those days are the best. Like, those are gold star days, but those days don't always come, and deadlines do. So I guess the good thing about everyone here is that we're all very talented people. And so even if we don't feel super creative, we're still probably pretty darn good writers. And so as long as it's clear, as long as it is getting information out to your intended audience that's going to be useful for them, that's still a win. So even if it doesn't feel creative and flowing and beautiful, it's still going to be a success. So that's good to keep in mind.
Very good.
All right, that's
Express how important it is, if you're experiencing that, just to get up and take a 10-minute walk. I mean, get out of your office, wherever, your library, your home, wherever you are, and get a different point of view and some fresh air, and then maybe it'll be more precious, right?
right.
Oh my gosh, I feel like you're looking at me when you explain this. When we were preparing the slide, I'm like, that's why I'm always late. Yeah. So.
But I feel like the personality of our writers, we want to do great work. We want to make it as perfect as possible, or at least most of the writers I've met. But as long as it's clear, it's grammatically correct, it purveys good information, that's still a win. So just get it done. All right, that is the end of our presentation. That leaves about a good 10 minutes for questions, for idea sharing. We want to hear your thoughts. We want, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any ideas that this sparked that has worked for you? We would love to hear from you.
Please.
Double checking the chat here. I don't think I see any questions. Okay.
That's the book I mentioned earlier. It's building a story brand. Looks like this. It's been super helpful. But he did say, like, any movie you go to, you'll be able to predict because you can tell the arc from just storytelling.
All right, there is a question. What is your favorite non-ag publication for inspiration?
That's a good one. I really enjoy, or at least, Yes, I enjoy reading real simple. It's about efficiencies in housekeeping, and I'm a terrible housekeeper, so maybe it's not a good inspirational piece, but I like their style of writing. It's very clear, it's very approachable. It makes me feel like I could get my house in order, and that's important. So the graphics are really cool. I like the design of it. That's probably my favorite magazine that's not an ad.
I like a simple country living, and yeah, I used to get them to tear out pages for home ideas, but there's some really good writing within those pages. It's very brief, and I tend to ramble, so it's very brief writing, but it's very much storytelling on how homes were acquired and then remodeled, and why things are the way they are within the home. So it's very simple too. It's very similar to Real Simple, just an older style probably.
What are some of yours? What do you guys like to read?
Yeah, what should we be reading?
Yeah.
Lily, I love that even a first draft is better than starting from nothing. Still progress. That sometimes that's really hard to talk ourselves into that.
Mm-hmm. I used to just put my byline on it immediately, just so the page wasn't blank anymore. My name is on it. Did it. Oh yes, I love to read Pioneer Woman. How do you craft excellent leads that draw your audience in? That is the $1 million question, right? I try to frame the problem. I feel like a lot of people are reading publications, marketing things because they're trying to solve a problem. And so try to frame that in a relatable way and kind of tease in that this piece that you are reading is going to help solve your problem. That doesn't always work. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but that's at least what I try to keep in mind. Why are they reading it? Because they have a problem. How can we help fix that? Does that make sense?
Humor would be my answer to that. This smallest bit of humor that I can put out early and often to reel them in to want to know the rest of the story. I know with technical writing, that's not always doable, but that's my personal suggestion.
I would love that. I would like to try to write a funny lead to a technical piece. That might be my life's goal. But it would that would be awesome.
I think that's what, I've learned too, when you go to conferences, I've learned which speakers to tune into because they're funny, or because they really do a great job of taking a complex topic and creating an analogy that's really fun and understandable. Or I know which economists now say things that are kind of crazy and give me headlines. And so I think part of it too, as I was thinking about, well, what are ways to do that? It's just you gotta find the great people to talk to that are fun. You can work in maybe the more boring people that are solid and say good things you need. But, I think it's just so helpful to be able to draw from the fun things that people say or the off the wall comments that they make, because if you look for them, they're out there.
Right.
That's true. And so many of our readers, whoever our audience is, I don't know many people who don't like humor or have no sense of humor. So at least that should be able to help connect people. Yeah, especially on econ. Oh man.
Yeah, I know. For those that love it and get excited about it, good for you. That was my bane of my existence in college, just survive, get through econ. And but now I've learned gosh, these guys are funny, and economists kind of don't give a crap because they're always right and wrong, right? They're never always right. They're maybe a little bit right, but they're often a lot wrong. And so I feel like they have this unabashed way about them of just saying what they want. And I've learned which ones are more fun to follow because they aren't filtered so much. I think that's a hard thing, because I think a lot of our subjects do have to, especially when you're talking to university folks, tap themselves down a little bit, or are monitored. These companies are monitored by some of you on this call. And So they don't just get to speak as candidly as they want to. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a hard balance.
One thing that just hit me, and this conversation is helping, collaboration. I know that you don't always have time to brainstorm an article or things, but if you can, I have always felt getting to collaborate with someone on a piece of writing has always made it better. Yeah, because lots of people have different ideas of, hey, I thought that part stood out to me, or that part stood out to me. What if you tweaked this a little bit? I heard that a little bit differently. Are you sure? Explain that to me, and then you re-explain it, and then it's more clear. So I really like getting to collaborate when you have time. And I know that is a luxury sometimes, but on those big stories, that helps.
And being confident to ask questions. I mean, that is such a big deal. And obviously, as you mature in your career and learn so much more, that changes. But there are so many things I look back on, things I've written years ago, and I wish I would have had the confidence to ask the right questions. And I really could have grown so much more and added so much to the conversation. So no matter the setting, I think there's such value in being able to ask the right questions.
Lori, I love your point of real life anecdotes and short stories. Yes. Especially making technical topics more relatable. I think that's perfect.
My favorite technical service vets tell good stories.
Yes. That is perfect.
Because you don't forget them. I mean, if they're good, you will remember that story. Yeah.
Love it.
You guys have any tips for using numbers? I know we've talked a lot about humor and fun stuff, but do you guys ever use numbers or kind of interesting statistics as ways to like talk about an old topic in a new way?
Yes. Finding stats on a big topic. I mean, I've written about BRD more times than I can count. Bovine respiratory disease, sorry. And I mean, it causes so much loss in productivity in the industry. I mean, you can use big numbers. I don't find them interesting, so I don't like to use them. But I enjoy when other people do. So I just haven't found a good way to incorporate them well. At least I don't think I'm very good at that. Sorry, that's a weird answer.
I don't use them much, but when we do, I mean, with getting a crop out right in this next 2 months and farming in the Midwest or across the US, everyone wants to know where we were a year ago, or how will this year compare to 2009 or 19. So, you know, agriculture is so cyclical, and in, you know, the life of writing about corn and soybeans and wheat, it's constantly comparing what we've done, what we're doing, where we are now from where we were a year or 2 years ago. Because every farmer, his greatest competitor is either within him or his neighbor, you know, and he never wants to talk about what he's doing, but he wants to know what everybody around the block is doing, whether that's the first to plant or the start planting or the first to start harvesting or whatever. So I feel like any writing I do that does include numbers, it's all comparison of progress or where we are from a year ago.
Sheila, that's a great question. You referred to lyrics in sports. What are your thoughts on referring to scripture or biblical references? I have used those a couple times. My hardest aspect of that was actually just attributing it correctly, like with the formatting, at least for our style, because then you've got the book, the chapters, the verses. Then do you put Bible as a book? Because it's books within a book. So I didn't do it often because I didn't want to attribute things incorrectly. But I think as long as you know your audience and that it will resonate with you, I think and you've picked a and a very applicable scripture or reference. And I think that still counts. There's a lot of our audience who are Christians, and that's going to resonate with them. Lindsay, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's typically when writing an ad, I think that's great. I think I have noticed there's certain companies that do a lot of that to the point where I've heard growers say, I don't need God to tell me where to buy my fertilizer or what seed corn to buy or whatever, you know. So it's a fine line. You have to know your audience. Personally, I love it. Professionally, I stay away from it just because I don't want to cross a line there. I guess hearing the feedback in study groups, I don't need God to tell me where to buy fertilizer. It's like, ooh, okay, yeah, you know, and that's just that's a professional opinion, not necessarily our personal blog opinion.
Know your audience, know your tone, know your all the things that has to be like a perfect storm for it to work really, really well. That makes sense. Lori, numbers, the best advice I was ever given, write it from the reader's perspective and what's in it for them. Yes. Or bottom line, what does the data point mean to them? Yes. One question, one of my very brilliant colleagues, Marie, asked the other day, we were talking about how to make a technical piece, how to put that together. And she's like, what is the story this data is telling us? And I loved that. Because that's exactly what our readers need to know, is what is the story these data are telling us. And yeah, that's a question we need to ask ourselves. It's a question we need to ask our tech experts. I think that was a really, yeah, we still like stories. We're humans. How do we make numbers fit into the story instead of just, here are these numbers, here you go. Because we're not writing market reports, or we might be, but less so. Maybe not that, but yeah, incorporate them into the story instead of them just being the story.
That's great advice, Lori.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've used numbers too. I was just thinking, like, I was talking to some college kids the other day, and I was talking about, I'm not necessarily like as excited. Numbers don't get me as excited, but I've used numbers to, like, even just numbers as far as what time something happened or how far away something was when something happened, and just using them as more of a detail to add detail and just to kind of break up. And sometimes using a punchy numbers can kind of draw people into not just thinking of it as an economic standpoint, but maybe more just as in storytelling. I think there's ways numbers can be kind of fun too.
And we also have to remember that some people are numbers people.
Yes.
Numbers people. A lot of people are. I mean, so I can't just say, well, I don't like them, so I don't need to use them. It's not about me, it's about the reader. So on one of, when I incorporate numbers, that's just get it done and use it and tell the information correctly. But yeah, a lot of people are numbers people, and we need to write for them too.
Oh, well, there's so much good information. I'm so grateful for you guys giving your time today. I try to like keep these as close to 10:45 as I can so people can get off to their next meeting. But thanks again. Really appreciate your insight and perspective, and look forward to continuing to share this out on social in different ways as well. And just want to remind you guys, plans are underway for our next coffee and collaboration on May 24th. So mark your calendar, and we'll get information out on social as well and through our e-blasts. But make sure you check out your LPC newsletter. And if you don't get it because you aren't a member, then feel free to shoot me a message, and I'll help connect you with how you can join, because it is definitely an organization that's worth your investment, because it will do a lot of great things for you. So thanks again, everybody. We hope you have a great day and enjoy the sunshine if you've got it in your part of the world.